Hello, thank you all for coming. This is How to Live Documentation. We've got Northampton-based photographer with us, Joe Westley, who's an analog photographer specialising in music, events and street photography. And he's going to be talking to us about live performance and artistic events and how he's been documenting that, and sort of reflecting on his kind of experience and professional experience recently. So I'll pass over to you, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks for the great introduction. And thank you for putting on this whole event across yesterday and today. You've introduced me, so I might as well just jump right into it, and I'll start. There's one image I really want to talk about, and it's kind of start at the beginning of sort of how I ended up getting into music through just my interest in photography, and then being like, oh, I wonder what's going on in the music scene. So I'll just share this. This document's available in the chat as well if people want to flick through my other work and stuff like that, while if you're not interested in the one I'm looking at. But this is kind of where it all these guys are where it all began. This is one of the bands in Northampton called Tragic, and they I was just taking photos, and they were like, oh, take some shots of us. And I thought, you're probably not going to be a band in 2 weeks time, but okay, fine. But we've worked together throughout my whole music photography and events photography life, as we've both kind of grown as it goes along. And these are now if you're into indie music or like with a punk sort of twist, these are the guys. They're so good. But and this isn't from the first shoot I did with them. The first shoot I did with them was Out and About, and that's another image I want to talk about in a bit. But this was from when I started thinking, how am I gonna find other musicians and how to get involved with the scene? Because the thing about event photography, you kind of have to, you have to get invited to the events before you can take photos of anything, and it's a real sort of, how do you get in there and things. So my idea was, at first I was doing the classic approach that a lot of people do, which is just like, well, just turn up to gigs with a camera and take photos, which doesn't work as well as you think it should, because what happens is you take photos and then you send them to the artist and they go thanks, and that's the last you hear from them ever again. So I decided, okay, I need a new approach, and to offer them something that perhaps they don't know they need. And I decided I was going to do a portrait series of like as many. I wanted to do every single musician in Northampton, because in my head I was like, we're a small town, there's probably 4 bands and I'll get through them in a couple of weeks. And then as I went through, it was just layers and layers of different artists and genres, and just it kept growing. And I'm still, like every other day, like someone will pop up on Instagram and be like, hey, we're a band, a jazz band or an indie band or trap metal, all sorts of weird genres. But it started off just, I wanted to make it, and I chose to do it on large format as well, because I figured the way to do it was to really get to know the musicians. And I think that's a really important thing, is to the people who you're documenting the events. It's always best to like know them as people and know what they're after, and really get in their heads a little bit, especially with people who are like performing, which musicians are. So I'd invite them into the studio and do these large format photo shoots where they'd take about an hour for the shooting stage, and then it'll be an hour of setup before and an hour afterwards of developing and printing and doing loads of boring stuff in the darkroom that I won't bore you to tears with. But the actual shoot parts we shot for most bands or single artists between 2 and 4 images for the whole shoot. And because it was large format, it's, even if you're going quick, it's 20 minutes to set up a shot regardless, and you've got a person sat in front of the lights cooking that you have to sort of entertain because they're going to get bored. And that was the way that you just forced that you'd be able to form a rapport with these people, because you couldn't hide behind the camera like you could with a digital one, where it's constantly trying to get you to keep pressing the button the whole time. So
sorry, Joe, I'll just interrupt you quickly. Someone was just asking if you could turn your volume up slightly.
Yeah, I can do. Sorry.
It's all right.
Is that better? It should be a bit louder now.
It's definitely a little bit louder for me, yeah.
Perfect. I'll talk up as well. Where was I? These shoots, yeah. So this was the first one, the first group shot we did, because I knew these guys already. So I was like, if I can get one photo to prove to other artists that I'm literally going to gigs and then like harassing after they get off stage to come and do a studio shoot. If I can convince them I have photos already, so I asked these guys because I knew them. And at the time, I remember thinking, like this, I believe they came up with the pose themselves after the guy in the middle, who's lead singer, said, "Should we all just get naked?" And I was like, "No, please don't like do that." So, and then they decided to do this. But the guy on the right is, I remember when I first saw the image, I was like, "Damn, I wish he had got more in there," because he is slightly held back. But the thing I've learned is that that's sort of weird because he left the band after a couple months after this. So this was sort of became a weird foreshadowing of what was to come for them. And that's what I'm really interested in with returning to other bands and organizers and people coming back again and again to see how the dynamic changes and things like that. And when stuff that originally I thought was, oh, this is terrible, I've completely fucked it up, ended up becoming a lot more important because I didn't want to be too, I'm never too keen on being too forceful with how people pose or look in their photographs or whatever. I'm quite happy to let them do their own thing, which is what musicians are great at because they're performers and they already have a sort of this is how I look and this is the image I want and I'm gonna perform to the camera and I don't have to dictate anything to them, and it becomes a much more of a collaborative process. But these sort of over time, these details come out that weren't as interesting perhaps at the time I first took them, and that's the real advantage of photography, is that it sort of ages really well. And another image also from Tragic, this is from the first shoot I did them of a photograph becoming more important as it went off. I'll scroll down and just let it load in for everyone else real quick. But you're probably thinking right now, this is just some blurry, disgusting throwaway photograph. But I ended up keeping it just because I felt at the time, because I was shooting film and it was like, we've done a photo shoot and we've shot 30 photos and that's it. And for me, in my head, I was like, photographers are meant to be taking thousands with digital cameras and stuff. So I just have to make use of everything. And I just sort of sent everything across thinking that at worst, they'll just ignore this photo. And then all of a sudden it became the cover for their EP and was on t-shirts, and it's all over Spotify now. And it's now become this sort of image that I just thought completely nothing of, and then has gone on to become sort of one of the most known images of the band in the area. And people are like, "Oh, you were the one who shot that image of them fighting or whatever." And once again, it's the two members who are still in the band. The other member is not present as well. So I guess that sort of story of him leaving the band and the new lineup that I'm keen to document once we get out of this whole lockdown situation is sort of playing in something that I didn't even consider when you're taking the photos at all. You're just firing away and seeing what happens. So I guess more of that is just keep everything, because people love looking. One, it's super cool to look through old photos and everyone loves doing it, whether it's your old hanging out at the park when you were 14 or Victorian photos. It's just old photos are super cool to look at and get involved with. And then, so that's music outside of actual events. And then the rest of this document also has music that are these live performances, and Charlie and Ryan they are the ones who came up with the live documentation title for this talk, and I think it's the most perfect way of describing my work they could have come up with, and it's probably better than saying a music photographer because it fits so well. As my goal isn't always to document the musicians on stage, it's also about the crowd and the types of people who go to the different events. And also the big overarching thing for me is the area of Northampton, which has this just sort of, at the moment the art scene's sort of growing, but it's really over the last 2-3 years has suddenly boom. And I'm really glad I stayed in Northampton for uni and things, because a lot of my friends were all like, fuck this place, we're going to London, we're going to Nottingham, we're going to wherever, we've got to get out and leave. And then I was like, no, I'm gonna stay. And they were just like, good luck, have fun. And I was like, I'm gonna make sure I can. So I sort of had that burning possession to try and find it. And then when I started digging, I did find it, and it's kept going. And we sort of have this within the town, this NN thing, the double N, which is it's the postcode, and it's just something people, I don't want to say it's a community or a collective, because it's sort of it's such a range of people that use the logo and throw it on stuff, and they use it to promote, and it just gives it that. But it all comes together, and when it accumulates for just this really broad view of the town within arts from all sorts of different angles, and I'm glad that I can add to that in some way by adding with, you know, my music photography and my street photography as well. That's all based in Northampton, and there's loads of organizers and things like that, and it's just super cool. And it's, I mean, I don't know where I was going with this tangent, but you know, this is the music events part, which is like what people are super excited about, and I love doing it, and I miss doing it for the last, you know, year and stuff. But just going to these gigs and being able to run around with my little camera and just like blast away into the crowd, and then people, you know, get stoked when they're like, oh my god, there's a picture of me at this thing, and then they, you know, you see it pop up all over the place. And I'm not a massive fan of Instagram, but I really do like when people, you see your photos reposted, that because I don't know anyone in here, but then I'll find out who they are through them seeing my photo and then reposting it on their story and being like, oh, I was at this place at this time. And it's like, yeah, everyone sort of comes together and you start to get to know people and things. And it brings sort of the audience and the band together in a unique way through photography, which is with photography. It's really interesting that Charlie and Ryan asked me for this like collaboration themed event, because photography is the ultimate, in my opinion, for collaborating with other artists, as it's just like you can complement any other art form, whether it's music or a painter or a poet, through without doing the same thing as them, if that makes sense. It's sort of complementary to anything. It's like, oh, you're an architect, I'll take pictures of your building. As I feel like with other art forms, it's kind of harder to do that. I think you get some weird looks if you said, here's a poem I wrote about your building, or here's a dance routine I did with your building, you know. But with photography, you can kind of get in there and get to know these people and offer them something that gives them something to look back and see their process through time in a visual way, and see how they've changed and evolved, and sort of offer them something. And also I'm putting my own spin on it with my style of photography and things that makes it much more collaborative and fun. And then the other side is, you know, the arts documentation, which I kind of consider it kind of a mixing thing, because like these two were from an arts event, but obviously they had musicians performing there. Let me scroll down, so this is frame. So it was a music event, but also for this artist who's the guy at the back on the left, Suede. He's one of my friends. He's a sort of street artist, and he did this clothes brand, and they threw a big party. And seeing the documentation of that is also what interests me with arts in a more sort of energetic way when it comes down to it. But and then you have more traditional arts, if I can get to that, where it sort of comes back to porn, because, you know, people have sort of these exhibitions and things, such as the one on the left, which I'm the second photo that I'm keen to talk about more in depth. This has also been taken. It wasn't a pub, because the pub that does a lot of our events also has like a exhibition section where they put up paintings and you know, live view events. But this lady on the left, Sarah Martin, she's dropping my headphones. She's one of the a painter in the area, and she's super cool, and she owns a gallery in town now, which she's pushing other artists in the area that I'm keen to like find out about. That's my new interest, as I've kind of been doing the music thing and finding out about the other bands and things like that. But now I'm like, there's this whole world, artists and painters and things that I'm becoming aware of in the area, that I really want to meet and talk to and find out what they're all about and what they think about the area and why they're here. She's really on the pushing on it, but she had this exhibition at the gallery, and she did a live painting there, and I went to, and afterwards I messaged her like, oh, it was a really cool event. And then she was like, oh, you were there? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, I didn't realize she had any idea who I was, and she should have said hi or whatever. And then a week later we went like back to the gallery just to meet up like together to talk and whatever, play pool. And then do you mind taking like a portrait. And I was like, yeah, cool. But she'd been telling me about like where her life was at this point. She was at this real sort of turning point between I mean, I won't go into it, but it was like really heavy, and this sort of like, this is, she wanted a photo that was like, this is a new start of like her sort of slowing down her art process from this sort of more rock and roll approach she'd had before, and sort of this new her living on her own and things like that. And she wanted an image that would capture that. And I'd sort of, it was kind of this weird thing where it was kind of, almost, I don't want to say sad, but I guess that kind of works in. But this, she's sort of worried about the future, and it's kind of open-ended. But she's also really excited about the potential, and she wants to capture that. And then there's the painting in the background where she was telling me that it's like she walks into a canvas and sees how they react, and they all do weird stuff, and that's how she creates her abstract pieces, and she calls it chemical composition. And she said that's the first time that she'd just seen it, the chemical she used, behave in a way that she's never been able to do it again. And she was just like, as she was moving it, she was like shaking with this sort of adrenaline from it, and just like really excited about her art. And that was why I chose to have this one in the background, because she was like, that's like the first time I've been excited by something I've been doing for so long. And she's like trying to not recapture it, but also just get curious again, which really sort of inspired me. And kind of being curious is like the number one thing you need as a photographer, because if you say you're going to be a music photographer, but you're like, I don't have any interest in, say, grime or a certain drummer, and you limit yourself like that, you're not going to be able to do it, because you need to have this sort of, oh, what's going on here? I really want someone to say they're doing something, and even if you think, I don't really know what this is all about, but you just got to dive in there, and you've got to have that ability to sort of, even if you turn up and there's 5 people there, you need to be able to make it look like a really cool event. And it's, I guess it's sort of a skill you form intuitively, where it's that thing where you can make a full room look completely empty, or you can make an empty room look completely full, and it's deciding where you want to sort of do it on there. But it's a tricky thing to balance sometimes, and you need to, but I think being curious and being like asking questions and talking to the people, especially when you do these sort of things, is the key to kind of finding the interesting little nuances and having stories to tell about the photographs afterwards as they go on. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking nonsense. And then like being curious is kind of the reason I ended up for the last 2 days, like yesterday and today, I've been documenting everyone's talks and workshops through this, and it's been super interesting, because it was sort of like when Charlie and Ryan approached me, I was like, yes, I've got an event after so long, like something to do. And then it was, oh, hopefully we'll be out of lockdown by then. And then it was looking like, no, we're going to still be in lockdown. In like the bottom of my heart, I was kind of like, oh, they're going to cancel it. And I was like, yes, damn. And then they were like, oh, we're going to do it online. And I was like, okay, at least that's something. But I figured the whole photography side of it that I'd be doing was going to be like called off, because I didn't really know how that was going to work in a virtual setting. But then you were like, no, you can still do it. And I was like, okay, let's find out what this is about. And it was just sort of this kind of thing where I was like, at first I was thinking, man, I wish I could do it in like properly in person and meet all the artists and things. And then yesterday morning I started taking photos, and I was like, this is really interesting and something that you never would have done otherwise. But because of what we're in, there's so many different quirks and things, and seeing people's, because essentially you're photographing a computer screen over and over again, but also as you get into it, it's like all the different backgrounds people have. And then one thing I've noticed that I've never even considered before, because like most of my photography is full body shots, or at least 3/4 length most of the time, and the body language is a whole body. But on here, it's just hands and heads. That's it. And I've just come to realize how really interesting people's hands are in videos when they're doing all these things. And I don't know whether he's in here, but Gian, who's been in all the other ones, you have the most interesting, expressive hands I've ever seen. I've just been like, yesterday I took a ridiculous amount of photos just because you kept doing really interesting hand movements as you were describing all these things and asking interesting questions. And I had to almost stop myself at the end and be like, I can't take any more pictures of him, otherwise it's just Charlie and Ryan are going to think I'm obsessed with him, but he does have the most interesting arms. And I think it has something to do with those Nintendo Wii controllers he has on his sofa. I think he's virtual, I guess you'd call it virtual photography sort of thing, which it's been done before in video games and stuff, but now it's sort of this thing it's not now. And I'm kind of thinking, are online events going to go away? Are they going to stay? And it's sort of this I'm definitely more interested in doing it again now. And I've in my uni work, I've been exploring sort of the more extreme of virtual photography, because I bought like a VR headset, and I've been doing like almost like street photography in VR, just like in these sort of social apps where there's people who are their avatars, but they're animated and stuff like that. And that's kind of what I've been doing recently, because you go outside and it's just empty shops and nothing about, and the odd police car and it's just like, oh, that's depressing. But then you come on to stuff like this and you're just like, oh, people are still doing stuff together and talking and having ideas or doing things. And it's almost like the pandemic and this virus thing almost doesn't exist in this setting, and it's really cool to see. And it's been interesting just to embrace the different quirks of it. Like, I don't know whether people have ever tried to take a photo of a screen, but it always has sort of these weird lines through it and things like that. And I'm always keen to embrace these sort of things. And even in my quote unquote real photography, because I'm a film and analog photographer, there's always scratches or dirts or graininess and sometimes slightly out of focus details. But I think those really sort of embracing where you are and what you're doing and just rolling with whatever happens and being kind of like, and as you go along, you refine it a bit more, because you realize the effect that some of these, what other photographers might consider mistakes, can be used for to really sort of push a message. Like in the case of the Sarah Martin one, people probably noticed that she's slightly out of focus, and that sort of soft focus kind of was how she was sort of behaving, but sort of coming out of becoming more focused again, having these her intentions more clearly set after this sort of period of time where she was kind of wandering and not sure what she was really doing. And yeah, I'm gonna refer to my notes to see what else, because I feel like I've blasted through everything I wanted to talk about really quickly. Oh my god, I actually have. That's not good. Let's what other photos have I put on here? Let's talk about some fun. Actually, let's talk about this band. This is Rolling Thunder. They're super cool guys. They're a 5-piece sort of rock band, and they released a vinyl a couple months ago, which I'm still trying to get a hold of because it sold out really quickly. But they asked me to do a sort of a photo shoot with them, because there'd been another weird way you can. I mean, artists are always looking for ways to try and find work and things like that, and they found me through a podcast I do with people from around Northampton, the different bands, and they were listening to a podcast with another band that they know, and then they were like, who's this Joe fella? And then they ended up on Instagram. They're like, oh, he takes photos. That's exactly what we need. Let's message him and see if he'll do ours. And I was like, yeah, of course I'll do it. And they wanted to do photos at the place where they did their first gig, which is this little pub in a village in the middle of nowhere that I had to like find and learn about. And it was really interesting. But the nice thing was the pub owner just said, you have completely free roam of go wherever you want. And we were like on the roof and then in the lounge and then in a little snug area and things like that. And I was shooting on about 3 or 4 different cameras, sort of the medium format and the 35mm, to give them just a massive range of different vibes that sort of they've been able to use as content and promotion and all different sort of things. And it makes you realize how many images just get used for. And I'm always impressed when people use images in a way that I'm like, I didn't think you'd use it like that or to advertise that thing, but okay. And there's this image here of on the left, the black and white one, of their lead singer Charlie, and he's just I really liked it because I'm always inspired by like the older music photography, and you get a lot of the rock and roll stuff being them like drunk and partying and stuff. And even though well, he wasn't sober, but he wasn't like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But he just kind of they'd like ran ahead of me, and I was like, where did they go? And then I walk in the room, and I don't know where the other 4 band members were, but Charlie was just sat there in the chair. He'd somehow got this trophy that I think was theirs, but may or may not be, and he was just sitting there, and I was like, that's amazing. I'm getting out the small camera and just taking that just for myself. And I think that's the important thing with any photography, especially ones where you're doing it for other people, is making sure you're still producing images that you'll be interested in. Because when I first started, I was doing just any job that came my way, as many photographers do, but I was still had this idea of what types of images I should be making, sort of these like this crisp, clean digital look that seemed to be the thing that everyone was doing. And but so I've got all that, and I was being invited to these really cool sort of events. I shot a Star Wars convention in like a cathedral, and it's just like I have photos of like R2D2s like whizzing between pews and stuff like that, and it's really bizarre, and like Luke Skywalker beneath a stained glass window. But because I had this idea in my head of like I have to do what I believe they want instead of just doing how I wanted to do it, they're just images that I look back and I'm like, oh, man, even at the time I could have done so much better. And I'm glad when scroll back up actually, this event, the Hometown Projects one, came in some, I'd already sort of knew about what they did and things like that, but I didn't really know. But they put out a call through the uni on our course of, oh, we need photographers to come document, and they ended up turning away a lot of people because they had that many people say, I'll do it. And when I first turned up, there was more photographers than people there, and I was like, oh my god, I've got a lot of competition. But I figured there's other people shooting it, so I can do whatever I want, and someone else will fill in if they don't like it and they're like, what the hell is this sort of out there style? So I just shot it exactly how I wanted to and just took the photos I wanted to. And it was this massive confidence boost where when it came to them posting images about the parties, it was only my images that they were using for things, and my images are now on the website and stuff. And I was like, oh my god, I beat these 7 other photographers, even though I'm all for collaboration. I'm not trying to make it a competition, but I was like, yes, I did it in my own way, and it gave me the confidence to now be like, okay, like I should be doing this style all the time, because why am I going out and in my own personal stuff making these black and white images in the way I want to do them, and then as soon as someone's like, hey, could you do some photos for me, because in my head I was like, they just want me because they know I own a camera more than they like my photographs. So I was like, and then just switching back to this like boring kind of digital style that everyone was sort of doing, and it wasn't very interesting. I wasn't interested in it, and you could tell when you looked at the images. So I was like, okay, now I've got the confidence to sort of keep doing and pushing what I'm doing. And that's kind of the knock-on effect of that is now that a lot of my stuff is stylistically consistent, except for when people specifically ask me to do other stuff, because they're still bands with their own brands and things like that, and you have to work around that in some ways. But at the end of the day, that just means you're taking more images, which means you have more photos to flick through on a rainy day, which is always fun. It means now my music and my arts and portraits and my street photography as well all have this sort of consistent style. And when you can put them in their own little categories, or you can put it together and you have this sort of overview of the town as a whole and the area that I sort of work in from all different angles, but all still kind of meshing together in a way, some with people, some without people. And it's really interesting. And everyone kind of can, because I want to give, when I'm photographing people, to give them a lot of freedom to be themselves and do how they want to be, as long as they let me, for the most part, do what I want to do with the photography. And that is where the sort of collaborative effort comes in. Yeah, I just want to talk as well, because the talk before me was about zines and stuff, and I was like, they've got me all stoked about that sort of production. And like over the years, I've produced a couple, and I wanted to produce more this year, but given that print shops were closed, and sort of I released one right at the start of lockdown, then was like, okay, I've run out of photos, so I'll have to take more before I can do a new one. But like making the zines and also finding out about the different zines that are made in the town and different people documenting it in their own different ways also super interesting. And it's just like events and stuff has made me find these people, whether they're musicians or people who are making their own artwork or just anything. And this is the best thing about events is just every time you go, you walk away and 20 more people, and it's like maybe it's a drawback of the online events, but maybe it's also that I've had my mic and camera off for everything but this one, so it's more on me that I haven't really managed to talk and interact with people that much. But actually, that would make a decent segue. How am I for time? Because we wanted to do Q&A.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few questions in the chat. So if you wanted to start the Q&A now, then we can definitely go ahead.
Speaking of talking to people,
I'll read you the questions if you want. So we've got one from Jessica Wilson. She said, can you tell us more about your style of shooting? What do you aim for, and what makes a good photo for you?
Ooh, that's a fun one. Okay, so when I first started getting interested in sort of photography outside of the what I believe was the correct way or whatever was when I discovered the post-war Japanese photographers like Moriyama and Araki and things like that, and it made me realize photography is expressive and you can do it in different ways. Like you have painters who do things in different styles and ways, but for some reason photography tends to have this reluctance to do so in a lot of parts for some reason. And what I aim for, especially in events and things like that, is just energy, which is what Alex Potton, who runs Hometown Project, said when he looked through my photos, and that's where I've I think is the best way to do it. He was like, when I was looking at them, you just got the energy and the vibe of the party, and I just want to, when I look at the photo, I want to be like, yes, that was what it was like to be there or be with this person, talking with them or whatever. Like whether that vibe is chaotic and people throwing around drinking and having fun, or whether it's a much more slower thing. I'm not picky, but I just want to make sure that it matches what the reality was like to some degree. And then how I'm not sure whether it was part of the question actually, but how I do it is just I use as simple a tool as possible. There's like these sort of point and shoot cameras that I own. I've went through from going to punk shows and just the point and shoot cameras being sometimes not of great quality. Just like I've went through so many getting smashed and things like that. But they are my favorite cameras to use because people aren't intimidated by them. You can be sneaky, and even though they have these powerful flashes that you're blasting people with, I still get like this guy on the right. I was talking to him and he was like, the weird thing is I don't remember you being there. It was like you could get in and out and be really bold but also just disappear at the same time, and afterwards then be like, here's the images, and they're like, oh my god, awesome. And then you have a new friend, and next time you meet, you high five and talk about doing more stuff together, and it's a fun thing. So was the end to that question what makes a good photo as well?
Yeah, for you personally, what makes a good photo?
I think it's for me personally, just in all photo shoots, I'm always excited when something I don't expect happens. Like me having this newfound interest in people's sort of hand gestures and things like that, and also just the quirks of the screen and things, because I found if you set your shutter speed too high, then the screen starts going really weird with the response, so you have to kind of use a slower shutter speed. But when people are on the camera going like this, then you have to be so you have to pick those moments really carefully where they have a good expression, good thing, but they kind of, and I've noticed people will do expressions and then they'll hold it at the end of sentences, you know what I mean? And it's things like that that interest me. And there was one I got where someone was talking and then Ryan talked straight after, and I took the photo in between, and the two faces have kind of merged together, and I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. So that was my new thing I saw and wondered what's going on here this morning. So I think it's always about finding something new and just kind of being like, just it's the curiousness when I go, what's going on there? How did that happen? Like, what's happening with the photography and stuff like that? And like letting the camera sort of guide you in that sort of way. And even when I have I said earlier, keep everything, and I do agree with that, but it can get to the point where you're just like, some of these could probably be deleted, like accidental shots of the floor and stuff. But I'm like, I don't know, maybe it'll be interesting in 10 years' time to look back at this one person's shoot. But I don't know. We'll find out whether they are or not. But sometimes it does go to a bit of a crazy out there place. And like a lot of my work, like I do deliver on what I expect, but there is also a lot of photos that I've sort of stocked up over the year that don't make it to Instagram or the website because I know it's just so like no one cares except me. But maybe it's something, and I have entire projects like that where I'll go out of the way to do something just to, and it's what feeds back into this main body of work that is interesting how it affects me. Like when I did the large format portraits, it gave me a new approach to focusing on smaller cameras and things like that. And the way I talk to people in portrait shoots now is much less, okay, we're here to take photos, and it's more like maybe we'll talk for 2 hours before about what's going on, and then we'll take 1 or 2 photos that embody that totally. And it's sort of that less is more sort of approach, and you pack more in and you keep them as you try and stop them becoming a collection of images, and you try and keep them as a person and be like, that's everything with the layers in it and things like that, rather than just is the difference between, say, portraits and pictures of people. In a sense, you have for me they're 2 different things, and a portrait represents more than just like the surface look and things like that. As a picture of someone, it's kind of, you have no connection with them at all. It might be someone you've passed on the street and just they don't give you anything of interest. But okay, we got question 1 done. I don't know what else to say.
I think you sort of already talked a little bit about this question, but someone was asking about that kind of decision to shoot in black and white, particularly. I know you said you sort of were trying to step away from the kind of digital photography that you see a lot of. Why black and white in particular? I know you can get color film and things like that. Was it a conscious decision, or?
Yes, but like I mentioned, the post-war guys and a lot of old photography really interests me. And Moriyama's known for this just radical black and white style, and I feel like I can get away with a lot more abstractness and quirkiness within a black and white image than I could within, say, a color image, just because of the way people interpret things, especially with things like I want my images to feel like you're looking back on a memory, in a sense, which, like, when you look at some of these, it's much more about, say, the moment or the expression of someone's face. Like this image on the left, you have the girl in the front, Brooklyn, who's like the coolest person ever, but this is the first time I've met, everyone in these photographs, to be honest. And this whole art scene I became aware of, that's hip hop and street art infused, and it's the coolest thing. I love it. But it's her expression and her point, and she like kind of noticed the camera and stuff, is much more important to me than, say, like the composition and stuff like that. But with color, it's almost more you're trying to, for me, I've not quite nailed that sort of messy, energetic aesthetic with color. My color work tends to be a lot more controlled and in place and things. And I do both because a lot of people also like color, and I think there is a notion of black and white being old-fashioned, which I try and I'd like to think my work doesn't feel old-fashioned. I like to think it's black and white but contemporary at the same time, as color always feels modern and stuff, but I don't feel it ages as well, because I find, but maybe that's just my personal preference on that. And I feel like sometimes I look back on color, but then things change. I mean, people get nostalgic and about old style, like blurry phone photos that you taken on drunk nights out now. It's becoming, and you see kids who are taking up photography who are 17, and they're trying to replicate phone photos from when they would have been 5 years old. And it's like a cool thing now, as if you tried to do that, a couple years ago, it would be considered like, what are you doing? But now it's kind of this, as it turns from just like that's the reality to it's a conscious decision. I think people treat it in a different way, and it triggers different memories for different people. So I think even photos taken on your iPhone now, like these high quality, nice photos that you take of your family and stuff, the cameras are going to get different and better, and those images are going to be considered old fashioned and have the nostalgic element that people will pinpoint what parts really made it that sort of aesthetic, and they'll bring it to that, and it'll be this stylized thing, almost like to make a sort of a movie reference, kind of like what like Tarantino does with, like, he took exploitation films and then made them into this, picked out what made those really good and really doubled down on the whole aesthetic of a thing to sort of bring it up. But yeah, I don't know where I was. Try not to get too tangential.
That was really good. We've got about 2 minutes left, but you could answer a question very quickly if you wanted. Sarah was just asking about putting price on your time, paid shoots. How do you sort of go about doing that? I realize there's only 1 minute left, so I don't know if you'll have time.
It's a really, really hard thing to do with how much you get paid and things like that. I think you get a better sense of it the more you do it, as you'll realize how much people are willing to pay and things like that. And as you get more established in what you're doing, you'll start to understand that it's, if you turn them down, it's no longer, well, I'll just get my cousin who owns a camera to do it. It's like you get that feeling that they've lost out on what they came to you for, which is quite nice. And it feels less of a loss to turn things down that aren't worth it, or they're just too much for what you can handle for whatever reason. But it depends what you're doing, because if you're working with Aston Martin, then they're going to pay you way more for the same thing than, the people I hang out with who are all musicians and are kind of in this sort of creative, how do we make money situation themselves. But I think finding the balance of, for specifically in film photography, it's like, I don't want to be anymore working at a loss because I have to pay for chemicals and film and stuff like that. So sometimes if I'm really, really interested in an event, I will say, I'll do it if you cover my expenses on that front. But people if you get to know people as people rather than people as customers, they're respectful of that you're offering them something, and people will pay because they understand that you're a human as well, and they want to see you do well. So I think surrounding yourself with a client base who's respectful of you as an artist and what you offer them is just as important as a client who you're going to work with once and then never again and just try and make quick sort of thing. People that you can come back to, and it's like the tragic photos, you look back and you're like, oh my god, now I know what's going to happen in the future. You get a story. So I love that sort of way of working. For me is
awesome. I'm sorry, I'll just interrupt, and because I just want to say thank you very much for the talk, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing all the photos you've taken from the festival.